Welcome to the Deep Dive. We had a request to take a closer look at Kurt Lewin's three-step model of change.
A classic framework.
It really is.
Yeah, and we are so ready to unpack it with you.
Yeah, everyone's heard of it, right? The whole, unfreeze, move, freeze thing.
Oh, yeah, it's everywhere.
But, I don't know, it always sounded kind of oversimplified to me.
Right.
I feel like there's got to be more to it than just those three words.
Absolutely. Lewin's thinking is way more nuanced than that.
Okay, good.
And to really get it, we need to start with his concept of field theory, which is the foundation for everything else.
Field theory. All right, I'm intrigued. Break it down.
So imagine you're trying to change your company culture.
Okay.
You're not just dealing with individuals, right? You've got whole system of forces you're working with.
Yeah.
You've got existing norms.
Right.
You've got leadership styles. Even the office layout can be a factor.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And Lewin's field theory says you need to understand all these forces, the ones pushing for change and the ones resisting it, if you want to target your efforts effectively.
So it's like a giant game of tug of war with all these different things pulling in opposite directions.
Exactly. And all that push and pull is what creates the status quo, which Lewin called a quasi-stationary equilibrium.
Quasi-stationary equilibrium.
Basically, things are kind of stable, but they can shift if the forces change.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just about individuals. It's about the whole environment they're in.
Right.
Wow. And he used this to analyze so many things.
He did.
Like from individual behavior to even bigger stuff like group dynamics.
Yeah. Things like marital conflict, social change initiatives.
Wow.
He applied it really broadly.
So how did he use this field theory idea to actually develop that three-step model?
Well, he realized if you want to change behavior, you can't just focus on the individual. You got to address the whole field.
The whole system.
The entire system of forces at play. And that's where the 3 steps come in.
All right, so let's talk about those steps. What's the first one? Unfreezing.
Yes.
So is that all about just making people aware of the need for change?
It's more than just awareness.
More than awareness.
Think of it like you're trying to plant a garden, but the ground is frozen solid.
Oh.
You can't just stick the seeds in and expect them to grow. You got to thaw the ground first,
Right.
break up that hard soil.
So unfreezing is more about shaking things up, disrupting the current way of doing things.
Exactly. It's about challenging those ingrained habits, those beliefs and social norms that are keeping everything stuck.
Hmm.
And that applies to individuals and entire groups.
I bet that's way harder than just sending out a memo that's like, hey, we're changing things.
Oh, way harder.
Yeah.
Lewin was really interested in how to create lasting change, not just superficial tweaks.
Right.
And he really believed that unfreezing stage was crucial for setting the stage for real transformation.
That makes sense. So once you've unfrozen things, what's next? The moving stage.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
This is where you start to see the change actually happening.
Yeah.
But remember, we're talking about navigating a complex landscape of forces here.
Yeah.
It's not a straight line from A to B. There's going to be obstacles, resistance,
Unexpected detours.
Totally. It's more like setting sail on a journey. You've got your destination in mind, but you got to constantly adjust your course based on the wind, the currents, the unexpected storms.
Ooh. I like that analogy. That really highlights how unpredictable change can be.
It really can be.
Yeah.
And that's why Lewin emphasized the importance of what he called action research during this stage.
Action research, okay.
It's all about taking action, gathering feedback, making adjustments, and learning as you go.
So it's not just about, making a plan and sticking to it no matter what.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to adapt.
Yeah.
Change course along the way.
Absolutely. You need to be constantly evaluating what's working, what's not,
Right.
and make those adjustments based on the data and feedback you're getting. Think of it as a constant feedback loop.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on all those change initiatives that just totally fail because they're too rigid. They just don't account for the messiness of real life.
Yeah. Lewin was way ahead of his time in recognizing that he saw change as a dynamic process,
Right.
not a static event.
Okay, but of course you eventually want the change to actually stick.
Right.
You want to reach your destination.
You do.
So how do you do that? How do you
Well-
make sure the changes you've worked so hard for actually last? How do you freeze things?
That is where the 3rd step comes in.
Okay.
But remember, freezing doesn't mean things become completely static.
Okay.
It's about establishing a new equilibrium,
Right.
a new set of norms and behaviors that support the change you're trying to make.
So it's about creating a new normal, making the new way of doing things feel like natural and sustainable.
Exactly. And that often involves changes to organizational culture, policies, practices, all that stuff.
Okay.
You need to create an environment where the new behaviors are reinforced and rewarded.
Now I'm really starting to see how all 3 steps work together.
Uh-huh.
You can't just move without first unfreezing and creating those conditions for change.
Right.
And you can't just assume that the change will stick without actually, like, freezing it into place.
It's all connected.
Right. We started this conversation talking about how there's just more to the 3-step model than meets the eye, and I'm definitely seeing that now.
Yeah.
So what's missing from that simple phrase? What else did Lewin have to say about change?
That is a great question, and that is what we'll explore in part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay, great.
We'll look at how Lewin's model has been adapted
Okay.
and sometimes misinterpreted over the years.
Interesting.
And we'll discuss why his full model, with its emphasis on field theory and democratic engagement, is still so relevant to the challenges we're facing today.
I can't wait. This has already given me a lot to think about in terms of my own work.
Good.
Thanks for walking us through this first part.
You bet. We'll pick up right where we left off in part 2.
See you there.
See you there.
All right, we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into Kurt Lewin's 3-step model.
And to fully appreciate his work, we really need to consider the historical context. So, he was writing during a time of, massive social and political upheaval.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
World War II, the rise of fascism.
Oh, right.
He was a refugee himself, having fled Nazi Germany.
yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so these weren't just, abstract ideas for him. He
Sure.
was dealing with real-world problems,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to create positive change in a world that felt like it was falling apart.
Yeah, that puts a whole new spin on it for sure.
Yeah, and that's why he was so passionate about applying his research to these social issues.
Makes sense.
He wasn't just interested in describing how change happens. He actually wanted to use his knowledge to make the world a better place.
That's really inspiring.
Yeah.
But you were saying before that his model was sometimes misinterpreted.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, after Lewin's death, his ideas became incredibly popular, you know? They were adopted by organizations, consultants, business leaders, anybody looking for ways to improve efficiency and productivity.
So Lewin's ideas were used to streamline businesses and boost profits.
Pretty much.
That seems like a little bit of a shift from his original focus.
It was. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with improving organizational performance,
Right.
some interpretations of Lewin's model really lost sight of his emphasis on human needs and social responsibility.
So they kind of took the mechanics of change, the how-to steps, but missed the deeper why.
You got it. And that's why it's so important to revisit Lewin's original work and kind of rediscover the full depth of his thinking.
Especially today when we're facing even more complex challenges.
Yeah.
Like climate change, social inequality, political polarization.
Right. You can't solve these problems with a simple checklist.
Exactly.
We need a more nuanced approach, a more human-centered approach to change.
Right.
And that's what Lewin's full model offers.
So how do we bring that human element back into it? How do we actually apply his ideas in a way that's both effective and ethical?
One key is to remember his emphasis on democratic participation.
Okay.
He really believed that for change to be truly successful, it needs to be a collaborative process. People need to feel like they have a voice, that their perspectives are valued.
Right. If you try to force change on people, they're going to resist.
For sure.
But if they feel like they're actually part of the solution, they're more likely to, embrace it.
Absolutely. Lewin actually saw resistance to change not as something to be overcome, but as valuable feedback.
Interesting.
It's a signal that people's needs aren't being met, that their concerns aren't being heard.
So instead of seeing resistance as the enemy,
Yeah.
we should see it as an opportunity to learn and maybe adapt our approach.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of action research.
Okay.
It's about constantly gathering feedback, experimenting, and adjusting course based on what you're learning. It's about engaging people in a dialogue, working together to find solutions that benefit everyone.
So it sounds like Lewin was saying that change is not a linear process, but a messy, iterative one.
It is.
And it requires empathy, flexibility, and a willingness to listen.
That's a great way to put it. And I think those qualities are more important than ever in today's world.
Yeah.
If we want to actually tackle these complex challenges we're facing,
Right.
we can't afford to just cling to those rigid top-down approaches.
Yeah.
We need to be more like Lewin, curious, adaptable, and really committed to creating a better world for everyone.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've explored the historical context of Lewin's work, how his ideas have been both embraced and misinterpreted,
Yeah.
and why his full model is so relevant to the problems we're facing right now.
Uh-huh.
But we still need to get practical, like how can we actually use these ideas to create meaningful change
Right.
in our own lives, our communities, and, the world at large?
That is a great question, and that is exactly what we'll explore in part 3 of this deep dive.
Perfect.
We're going to look at specific examples of how Lewin's model can be applied to address some of the most pressing issues of our time.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Kurt Lewin's 3-step model of change.
And we are ready to get practical. Like, how can we actually use this framework to address some of these big real-world issues we were just talking about?
Yeah, perfect timing because honestly, I've been thinking about climate change this whole time.
Hmm.
It just feels like the ultimate test case for Lewin's model,
Yeah.
So many forces at play,
So
much
many.
resistance to change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got everything right. You've got individual behaviors, corporate practices, government policies, global economic systems.
It's a lot.
It's this whole tangled web of forces that's keeping us locked in these unsustainable patterns.
Right. It's like that quasi-stationary equilibrium we were talking about before. But this time, it's an equilibrium that's like actively pushing us towards a climate crisis.
Yeah, it's not a good equilibrium.
Not a good one at all. So how do we unfreeze this massive system?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not just about raising awareness or like guilt-tripping people into changing their light bulb.
Oh, no, it's much deeper than that.
Right, we got to understand and actually disrupt those powerful forces that are keeping us stuck.
Yeah, and you have to acknowledge the economic interests that are, like, really invested in the status quo. Like fossil fuel companies, industries that rely on cheap energy, even countries whose economies are basically built on extraction and consumption.
Right, it's like they're these massive boulders in our life space diagram,
Totally.
creating a huge amount of resistance to any kind of meaningful change.
Yeah, they are.
And then you have like all the psychological forces too.
Yeah.
Denial, apathy, just feeling totally overwhelmed by the scale of the problem.
It's a lot.
So unfreezing in this context means like tackling all of those forces head on. Like exposing those vested interests, debunking all the myths,
Yeah.
and like really highlighting the tangible impacts of climate change that are already happening.
Right, and replacing those feelings of helplessness with a sense of urgency and agency,
Yeah.
and hope. Showing people that individual actions really do matter, that there are viable alternatives out there,
Right.
and that a more sustainable future is actually within reach.
I love that. It's not about doom and gloom.
It's not.
It's about empowering people to be part of the solution.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say we've like shaken things up. We've got people thinking differently. How do we actually move from unfrozen to moving towards a more sustainable world?
That's where Lewin's action research comes in.
Right.
It's all about experimentation, taking action, gathering feedback,
Yeah.
and then adjusting our approach based on what we learn. It can't be like a top-down, one-size-fits-all solution.
So what might that look like in the real world?
Well, it could mean cities piloting new transportation systems, businesses adopting circular economy models, communities setting up renewable energy cooperatives. It's about encouraging a bunch of different solutions and seeing what actually works.
In different contexts.
Exactly.
So it's going to be kind of messy and unpredictable.
Oh, for sure. Real world change always is.
We're not dealing with a controlled lab experiment here.
No, we are not.
We need to be adaptable, willing to try new things, maybe even fail a few times along the way.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Okay.
Embracing that uncertainty and actually learning from those failures is all part of the process.
Right. It's how we figure out what truly works.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're experimenting, we're making progress.
Yeah.
How do we make those changes stick? How do we freeze this new, more sustainable world into place?
I think here we have to think about shifting those social norms and values we talked about earlier.
Right.
Sustainability needs to become like the new normal, the expected way of doing things.
Not just this, like niche concern for a small group of people.
Exactly.
So how do we get there? Is it just more education and awareness campaigns?
Education's important, but it's not enough on its own.
Okay.
We need to change the incentives, change the rules of the game,
Okay.
We need policies that actually reward sustainable practices and penalize the unsustainable ones. Make it easier and more affordable for people to actually choose those greener options.
And we need to celebrate the people and organizations that are leading the way.
Absolutely.
Show that a sustainable future isn't just possible.
Yeah,
It's already happening.
it is.
Create those role models and success stories that inspire others.
Exactly. And remember, this is where Lewin's emphasis on group decision-making and participation is so important.
Right. So this can't be dictated from the top down.
It can't.
It has to be a collaborative effort.
It does.
People need to feel like they have ownership over the change.
They do.
Be part of shaping that new sustainable world.
Yes, and when people feel that sense of ownership, that's when real lasting change happens.
So if we want to use Lewin's model to tackle climate change, or really any other complex challenge out there, what's like the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's about embracing that messiness of real-world change, being willing to experiment, to learn from our mistakes, and to really work together, to not get discouraged by the scale of the problem, but really focus on what we can do, one step at a time.
It's a powerful reminder that change is not an event.
It's not.
It's a process.
It is.
It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes collaboration.
It does, but it's also incredibly hopeful.
Yeah.
Because it reminds us that we actually have the power to shape our future, to create a world that's more sustainable, more just, more fulfilling for everyone.
Wow, this deep dive has been such an eye-opener. Lewin's model isn't just an academic theory.
It's not.
It's like a practical roadmap for
Exciting.
navigating the complexities of, like, the 21st century.
It really is. And I think Lewin himself would be thrilled to see his ideas being used to address the challenges we're facing today. Remember, he was all about applying his work to making the world a better place.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored the depths of Kurt Lewin's three-step model.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, the best way to honor Lewin's legacy is to take action. So go out there, experiment, collaborate, and make some change happen.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.